Hey guys, what's going on? So today I've got a video for you on isolation exercises, why you're going to do them, when you might not want to do them, what parts of the body should you be working and isolating in addition to your compound movements, and then I'm going to give you some of my favorite exercises for those parts of the body. At the end of today's video, I've got a sample plan that you guys can look at. I might put this in the description down below so you can reference that as you're watching the video, as you're going along. But I definitely say you should stick around to the very end because that's going to help the beginners really get a good idea on how to make a more complete program. It's going to build off of the foundation video that I just put out, talking about the compound movements and the movement patterns. So if you've already watched that video, great. This is going to build off of that. If not, consider that maybe a part one to this, and I would say definitely go watch that video if you haven't yet. All right, now let's get into it. So why do we isolate muscles? Well, the reason why we do exercises that isolate muscle groups, it could be for a number of reasons. If someone is injured and they're just coming out of the rehab process, they're getting a cast taken off, or they just had surgery, something like that, an isolation exercise can be a really good low stress, low impact, easy, stable way to work a smaller muscle group to help beef it up before the body is ready for larger, more stressful, function movements, right? Like the basic movement patterns are too intense because this part of the body's injured. So when someone's beat up, those are good reasons to do isolation exercises. Now, on top of that, we also use isolation exercises to fill a gap in our programming. So when you're doing a lot of compound movements throughout the week, you might be thinking, oh, I'm getting a ton of work done. And if you're a very strength focused person, or sport specific, or power, or Olympic lifting, you might think, I don't need to isolate my muscles. I do plenty of work. It's just going to bleed into my recovery and my time. And there may be some truth to that, but a lot of these are pretty low energy expenditure, like calf raises, biceps curls, a little bit of shrugs for your traps. Stuff like that is really simple, really foolproof. So if you add it into almost any program, I would suspect that it is rarely truly a detriment. And often people hide behind this, oh, I'm doing enough work on my compounds, I can be minimalist, and I don't need to isolate and do all these exercises. When in fact, you can just do supersets. You can just do a couple muscles here and there. They're really simple, couple sets here and there throughout the week, 2-3 times a week, and then boom, over the course of months and years, those muscles grow and they get stronger. Your physique looks better. It may help prevent the onset of certain injuries, or at least imbalances. But at the very least, you're going to be bigger, stronger, and look more proportional, right? Because if you only do those compound movements, sure, you'll develop your chest, your lats, quads, hamstrings, glutes, lower back, but if you don't develop your calves and your forearms and your biceps and your traps and your side delts, you might look funny. And if you're okay with that, then that's great. But if you want to have a nicely balanced physique, it's important to include isolation movements. You really can't get enough work just from the compounds. Okay. Now, there's also some reasons why you would specifically not isolate outside of the I do enough work for my compounds excuse. Now, if your job is very physically demanding, that could be a perfectly valid reason not to do a lot of isolation movements, but for specific areas. A good example would be someone who does a labor job where maybe their arms, their forearms are really taxed, maybe their lower back. So if that's the case, whether it's a construction job or working in a warehouse, something like that, maybe not doing forearm curls or lower back, back extensions, cobras, things like that, paused RDLs. Maybe that's not for them. It could work for someone else, but maybe it's not ideal for them because this person, again, they're still going to want to use those muscles when they do their compounds, even if their frequency of exercise isn't that high. So when your work is very demanding, consider what parts of your body are being demanded the most from your work. What's getting worked the most by your job, and then kind of subtract that from your program and say, I don't really need to isolate that. Or if I do, not very much. Maybe one day instead of 2 days, 2 sets instead of 3 sets or 4. Really simple, straightforward stuff, right? Then in addition to that, there's the sport. So if someone does recreational or competitive sport, let's say they're a boxer or kickboxer, right? So you're doing a lot of drills, a lot of push-ups, a lot of punches. You're going to build your front deltoids from all that sparring, shadow boxing, and so on, all the pad drills, right? That person, if they're doing bench press twice a week and overhead press with a barbell twice a week, they probably don't need to do dumbbell front raises in addition to that. It's just a little bit superfluous, a little bit redundant, they might find that that bleeds into the recovery when it comes time to do their actual fighting practice. So if your sport has a specific demand, think about what parts of your bodies get worked the most, and then again, just like the person with the job, kind of subtract that from your program and keep in mind you don't really need to work that area as hard. There's probably countless other examples, but that's just one. Another good reason to maybe not do certain isolation movements would be your specific limb lengths and limb length ratios, and without giving you a super big brain sciencey guide on determining limb length ratios, well, you can think about it like this. Some people, when they do a barbell bench press with an equally wide grip relative to their frame, some people are going to get more triceps work out of that because they have longer arms like me. And someone who's shorter, often has shorter arms, they're going to get more chest work, and they're not really going to feel it in their triceps. So this can lead to different sticking points and weak areas down the road as the weights get heavy. The person with the good chest work might struggle with lockout, whereas the person with the long arms might actually get stuck closer to their chest, getting the weight off of their chest. Okay, before they get to that lockout. Lockout's no problem. They get plenty of triceps work. That might not necessarily be the case, but often it is something along those lines. So you would consider, okay, if I'm getting more tricep work on the compounds, that means I need to isolate it less. Maybe not none, but certainly less. And the opposite is for the other person, gets plenty of chest work. Okay, maybe I don't really need a secondary chest movement, or maybe just less volume with that, and I should definitely do direct tricep work, whether it's a pull down / push down, something like that. And then last but not least, okay, this is a pretty good reason, the compound volume as it works certain movements. So your compounds are going to bleed into each other a little bit. Squat, deadlift, they're going to have overlap. So if you're getting plenty of back work from that in your own estimate, then that's great. But if you're struggling keeping a neutral spine on either of those exercises, then consider isolating, because chances are you could just do 1 day a week where you do a couple sets of back extensions from the chair or with a barbell, cobras, paused RDLs, and you can get a good benefit from that, and that will help you in the long run. There's also a consideration for things like your forearms. So if you're doing a barbell row and deadlifts like an RDL, right, with no straps, well, you're getting a ton of forearm work just from those compound movements alone. So with forearms, it might just be the case that you need to think, okay, how many sets do I want to use straps on? Or is my grip loosening by the end of my sets? Do I have to drop the weight? And if you have to drop the weight, well, then maybe you should be using straps more. You don't necessarily have to isolate the forearms. Now, before we go into a little bit deeper of a dive into the actual muscles I'm going to recommend isolating, and maybe 1 or 2 exercises for each, there are some muscles that I will not be mentioning. Quickly, I'm going to run those through. Not really going to give much of a reason why, other than I might talk about them in future videos, and I just don't probably consider them to be that essential. Yeah, here's the list. So tibialis anterior, that's that muscle beside your shin bone, lifts your foot off the ground in a dorsiflexion. And then there's the rotator cuff. I would much rather make a separate video about that altogether. The mid and lower traps. So today we're just going to talk about the upper traps. The glute medius, so that small glute that's on the side of your hip that opens your legs apart. Not going to be talking about that. And then the obliques and other smaller core muscles like your transverse abs and your QL. I'm not going to be talking about those today. This is also not a prehab rehab video, so I will be doing a separate video on prehab / rehab exercises for basically kind of bulletproofing your joints a little bit. If you struggled with muscle tears in the past, maybe quads and adductors on a squat, I'll give you some good prehab, rehab exercises for that. Same thing for the triceps tendons. It'll be a great video, probably coming out soon, so stay tuned for that one. It'll be awesome. And yeah, that covers what this video is not. Now, on to the muscles we're actually going to do. We're going to talk about the upper traps, so this muscle up here. We're going to talk about your triceps, both the long and the short head. Biceps / elbow flexors, so basically the arms, right? Calves, although we're mostly going to be talking about the big outer calf, which is the gastroc. Forearms, abs, lower back, and the lateral deltoids, right? Okay, so those are the key areas that I want you to think about, big picture. So first, let's start off with the side delts. That's a fun one. So here you can see those nice circular Death Star deltoids. Okay, so in order to work those, you basically have to bring your humerus or your upper arm bone into abduction, so away from the midline, something like this. You can do real simple stuff like lateral raises. You're just raising dumbbells out to the side. Lou raises have you go all the way up like that. That's a fun one. That's more of a mobility exercise, but you still get a great stimulus out of it. And then you can also do, they're called Egyptian lateral raises. You lean against an object and hold it, and you just get your torso in an angle, and then you do that. So those are all good ones for the side delts. Side delts don't get a lot of work from other exercises. Certain row variations might work your side delts a bit, but even then, I would always recommend, if you care about how your shoulders look, especially, right? You want big shoulders, you need to grow your side delts by doing side delt isolated work. So lateral raises, maybe 3 sets every other day, and do that consistently. You do it till it burns hard, 10 to 20 reps, somewhere in there. Yeah, absolutely. And try and be relatively strict about it. Try and go high and slow. Really go slow on that one. Don't just caveman your way through it. Now, the next area that we're going to talk about is the upper traps. Everyone loves shrug muscles, right? Having that little bed of muscle that looks like a pillow someone could sleep on. To grow your upper traps, well, some people will tell you compounds work just fine, and there's truth in that. If you're doing heavy barbell rows and deadlifts, you'll get some trap stimulus, but I think doing a weighted shrug consistently or a farmer's carry, or both. Farmer's carry is just when you walk with dumbbells for a certain distance or amount of time, then you drop those heavy dumbbells. I think doing that for a similar amount of volume that I just recommended the side delts, 2 to 3 times a week, 3 sets, I think that's a really nice way to grow your upper traps. You're not going to get enough work from your compounds to make a huge difference. They will help, but in order to push it over the edge, you should still isolate it. All right, next area we're going to cover is the elbow flexors. So the biceps and his friends. All right, so curls. There's a lot of ways to do curls, but you don't need to do that many curls. I would rather see someone just do one biceps curl variation and stick to it twice a week for a whole year without skipping a week. And maybe it's not the best biceps variation in the world. Maybe it looks slightly sloppy in their technique. I'd rather see them do that consistently than switch between biceps variations every week, because I saw a new cool one on social media. Oh, this guy's leaning against a chest rest, and now this guy's doing it with resistance bands attached to the dumbbells, and all kinds of gimmicks that people will tell you that they help change the strength curve or whatever. Yes, it's true that the strength curve on the bicep is toughest right here in the middle, and so that makes the sets kind of harder to grind with strict technique. But you know what? If you play around with weight and rep range, with something you can do 8 to 12 minimum, you're going to have really good control over it. You're not going to be swinging your hips back and forth. So as long as it doesn't look too bouncy, too all over the place, full body swinging, it's okay to have a slight amount of cheat and maybe not fully extend your elbows at the bottom. You can do this standing with 2 dumbbells. You can do this standing with a barbell. You can do a hammer curl straight up and down like that. And yes, there's reverse curls that work more the forearm and outer part of the upper arm. I don't think those are really necessary because all the elbow flexors work in this position. It's just that the outer one here doesn't work that hard. So if you want to grow big arms, you should probably do one that's biceps dominant at the very least, and then consider doing things like hammer curls and reverse curls. Awesome. All right, so next up, we're going to be going on to the triceps. This one's a fun one. So kind of going back to what I mentioned earlier with the limb lengths, for that person who has the long arms, well, when they do overhead press and bench press, they're getting plenty of short head work, right? They're getting a lot of work done for their triceps. So they might mostly benefit from doing a skull crusher exercise where they're going back like this and getting a good stretch in the long head of their triceps. That's probably beneficial for them. Awesome. For the person with shorter arms that maybe don't get so much work for their short head of their triceps, again, isolating it with a nice push down, cable push down, diamond push-ups, close grip bench. Those are really good ways for them to do it. Even though the close grip bench and the diamonds are technically compound movements, they're good accessories, and I can talk about those more a little bit in another video. All right, so after the triceps, we have the forearms. Right? Everyone wants to grow big forearms, right? Maybe just Popeye with his spinach. With the forearms, really do consider what your compounds are doing for you. If you're doing weighted pull-ups or chin-ups, Romanian deadlifts, normal deadlifts, farmer's carry, rows, things like that, right? Like 2-for-1 deals, 3-for-1 deals. Yeah, you're getting plenty of work in your forearms depending on how much you're using straps, hook grip, mixed grip, chalk, all that stuff. So if you're already doing a row variation and a weighted chin-up and a deadlift variation, that's probably enough on its own. And so any isolation work you do could probably kept to like one day and maybe 2 to 3 sets spread across the whole week, or confined to that one day. You don't need to do a ton of forearm curls and stuff like that. It really should be dependent on how you individually recover, and if your sore forearms and your weak grip is getting in the way of certain exercises, consider using straps on those exercises, or maybe cutting back in certain places. All right, so just pay attention, basically, to your grip and how it feels. All right, next up, we've got the calves. This is a good one. Now, there's basically 2 ways to train your calves. You can do it with the knee extended or the knee bent. And what's going to happen if you train your calves with the knee bent, like on those seated machines that go up and down? What's going to happen is you're going to train a muscle called the soleus. That is a good muscle to train if you're, doing something like basketball or any really intermittent sport where it involves changing direction or running or jumping, stuff like that. It's going to translate to kind of like springiness in your step. And there's arguments maybe that's a good one to prevent injuries, right? As generic as that sounds. But it definitely leads to better jumping. Knees over toes guy talks about soleus training a lot. So if you're an athlete, I would say definitely consider isolating that at least a couple times a week. That machine works just fine, but you can do other things like going into a deep lunge where your heel comes up off the ground and you really try and go into a deep dorsiflexion and then try and like push to get that heel down towards the ground, stuff like that. But yeah, check out Knees Over Toes guy if you want more on soleus training. For the gastroc, you have to have your knee pretty much extended to do that, right? Because this one's a biarticular muscle, and so in order to get a stretch on on at least one head of it to actually be able to shorten it properly, well, you need to stretch out the part that crosses your knee, because it's also a knee flexor. It's not just working at your ankle, even though it's a calf muscle. So this would be something like going for a hike with some weight in a backpack, or if you're just going for a hike in general with some objects, maybe you're camping or something like that. That's going to help build up your calves, right? Like go on lots of walks. You want to build your calves. But you can also do stuff like taking a barbell, strapping in, put a 45 on each side, put more weight than that on each side, and with flat feet starting, just lift your heels up off the ground, try to do a little pause of thought, and slowly come down. No matter what you're doing to train your calves, I always recommend a slow eccentric in order to prevent kind of wear and tear on your Achilles tendon, because if you're just doing it like a spring, your tendon is doing a lot of the work. So both for preventing injuries and actually getting more work for the muscles, I definitely recommend the slow eccentric on any calf training. Great. Perfect. All right, so now we're going to go on to the abs. This is a fun one. Who doesn't like training their abs? Have chiseled ones like this guy, Lego blocks. So for abs, I would think you can train these probably anywhere from like 2 to 5 times a week, depending on what effort you're willing to put in. Okay, not everybody cares about having a nice six-pack, but I'll say this. As a beginner, maybe you were a skinny guy, maybe you're around 10% body fat. You might have had abs then. As you bulk up and stuff, if you're letting yourself eat in a calorie surplus, as you approach 15, 16% body fat, they might dissipate a little bit, and as you get closer to 20%, they'll definitely start to dissipate. What ab training is going to allow you to do is have visible abs at a higher body fat percentage. So that's pretty cool. Abs are not only made in the kitchen. That's a myth. Don't listen to that. That's nonsense. It's partly diet and body fat percentage, and it's partly muscle. It's obvious that it has to be both. It's not one or the other. If you're going to train it more like 5 times a week, I would say just like 1 or 2 sets. Not necessarily failure would be a good way to do it. If you want to just do 2 or 3 days a week, I would say 3-4 sets at the most. They can recover pretty good. I wouldn't stress going too much with like weights, but anything you can do 10 to 20 reps is probably manageable. A set of 5 for the abs is probably unreasonable, but otherwise, as long as it's pain-free, it's practical to set up, any ab exercise that you feel you have a good mind-muscle connection with is a good option for you. Awesome, great. So a couple other options that you can think about is doing leg raises and also doing a weighted crunch. So having dumbbells in each hand and literally just lifting yourself off the ground with regards to your upper back. That's what's coming up. Your shoulders are lifting off the ground. That's what you're doing. Otherwise, just keep it simple with your abs. And the last one, the lower back. So lower back, that one again can be done pause Romania deadlifts. You can do cobras. If you do this one, keep in mind all those other variables, right? What did we talk about at the start? There's 4 good reasons. There's 4 good reasons not to isolate certain muscle groups. Those would be when your work sort of bleeds into the capacity. So if you have a physically demanding job, consider what muscles are being worked the most, and then maybe go easy on them in your program. Number 2 is as it pertains to your sport. So someone who is getting good deltoid work, playing their sport, or a lot of calf work, probably doesn't have to train those muscles very much by isolating. The third is going to be dependent on your limb length. So someone with short arms should look at how much tricep work they're getting on a bench versus someone with long arms, and they should choose their isolations accordingly. And last but not least, look at how your compound movements play into the overall volume, the overall stress being applied to different muscles, including your lower back, your glutes, your forearms, triceps, things like that. And think about, do you really need to add very much isolation? And if you do, 1 day versus 2, things like that. Consider making trade-offs and just gradual introductions of more exercise. Perfect. All right, and now we're just going to go on to a sample program. So let's take a look at that. This is just going to be covering some generic compound movements, so just the movement patterns, and then I'm going to add in examples of isolation work that you can do around that. So this is a 4-day program, and in this 4-day program, you're probably going to spend about 60 to 75 minutes per session when you're exercising. It's going to be Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. Wednesday, Saturday, and Sunday are going to be rest days. So on Monday, what you're going to do is a horizontal press. That's going to be your first one to open up with. Then you're going to do your hip hinge. Hip hinge number 1, we're going to call it. Then you're going to do a dumbbell curl and calves in a superset. So the superset means that you're cutting down the rest in between exercises. You're going straight from one into another in order to save time in your program. So those are going to be supersetted together. Then you're going to do some kind of weighted shrug, whether that's with a bar or with dumbbells. And then you're going to finish off with skull crushers, probably with dumbbells or with a small bar like an easy curl bar. That was Monday, and now Tuesday is going to be vertical press, a squat movement, a vertical pull of some kind. Then you're going to go on and do a lateral raise for your shoulders, and then you're going to do some abs. And that's it. It's real simple and straightforward. Thursday is a repeat of Monday, except you're going to do hip hinge number 2, just for fun. Change it up. You can do a separate one. So a competition hip hinge one day and an RDL the next day. Right. And then Friday is going to be a repeat of Tuesday. Great. And then, so there you go. You've got 3 rest days, and on 4 days, you're doing an hour to an hour and 15 minutes of exercise, and you're covering quite a lot of areas. That's not fully comprehensive, but there's a lot of work being done there. And if you follow a program similar to this, I guarantee you're going to grow a better physique, a stronger physique, a more muscular physique that's pretty proportional over time. There's not a lot of areas being ignored. Of course, there's definitely more detail to add to this program to make it complete. Not that there's such a thing as a perfect program, but that's a really good example of a reasonable, well-rounded program that even a beginner can do. So I think I'm going to write that one down in the description for you guys as a little treat, so you can think about that. I'm not going to fill in sets, reps, intensities, things like that. You can try and get creative on your own and use the advice that I've given you in this video and previous. But now I'm just going to finish off with a few general tips. So remember, with your exercise program, you need to plan your compound movements first. You cannot put the cart before the horse, all right? If we plan our isolations first with, our volume, our selection, our intensity, frequency, all that stuff, if we plan that before we do compounds, it's like trying to make a cake and just having the base and then putting the icing on top, versus doing the opposite, right? So you want to do the cake first, then put the icing on top. Compounds first as the foundation, then the isolations, that's the icing. You don't want to just have a pile of icing and then try and put some cake on top. That's not going to work. I would also recommend that for most of these, you stick to like an 8 to 20 rep range. You could do heavier stuff, certainly on things like your biceps if you really want, but especially things like lateral raises and abs, staying above 10 reps is probably ideal. It's not dangerous to do heavy weights on really any of these areas mentioned in the body, but consider what feels good for your joints and what you're comfortable with your level of experience. But 8 to 20 is probably reasonable for any isolation movement. Supersets and rest pauses. So supersetting, just like I talked about in that program example, doing the calves and the biceps back to back with a short rest in between, it's going to be a great way to get a lot of work done in a short period of time. Similarly, what you can do with a rest pause is, let's say you're doing biceps curls and 10 or 13, 10, 12, 13 is going to be failure. Well, if you stop at like 8 or 9, give yourself like 10, 15 seconds, that may give you enough energy to push past that, sort of beyond failure, or get more work done per set. So consider doing that as well, especially if you're doing higher reps where there's more burn. A few seconds of rest, 10, 15, 20 seconds, will help flush out some of that burning sensation. And the last one would be, try to use more or less the minimal volume per session, so that way you're not bleeding into your compounds. If you do 5 sets of biceps curls the day before you do your weighted pull-ups and chin-ups, well, that's going to bleed into your performance and it's going to affect how much work you can do. You might not think that's a problem, but if you're trying to do your weighted pull-ups to grow your back, which is what you should be doing it for, then that is a bit of a problem. So maybe just do 2 or 3 the day before, or actually do it the same day or even the day after the compound movement, which works the same muscle. So it's a little bit of a juggling game. You can think about it your own, but don't pre-fatigue and bleed into your own work by doing a ton of isolation the same day right before the exercise or the day before that certain exercise. So consider using minimal volume on a session-to-session basis when you isolate. That covers it all. Thanks, guys. I know this was a longer one today. The program will be in the description. Go ahead and have a look at the template. Thanks so much for joining me. I hope you guys got a lot of good information out of this today, and I'll see you next time. All right, take care.